Okay, thank you for joining me again as I get to the section which I think is going to be the most important part of this whole book. And that is the chapter on empathy, which is called our platinum plumb line. Now, also in watching back some of these videos, I have come to understand right now that I'm definitely not a professional, and I am doing the best that I can right now with the limited resources that are at my disposal. In fact, off screen, if you could see over here, I've actually rented a hotel for 2 days so that I could do this project. So I'm not in a studio. Bear with me. I'm not a professional. I'm just doing what I really believe my heart is called to, and I'm doing the best that I can. So again, a little bit of patience and goodwill and understanding. I'm going to make a lot of mistakes when I read this, but I am trying. So with that being said, empathy is the third word in the title of my podcast, and it is what I think is the most important thing in fighting racism. So I want to get pretty in depth today. And so without further ado, let's just jump right into this. Empathy is about finding echoes of another person in yourself. Ethics is a rather muddied and complicated philosophical field. There's still quite a bit of debate on this topic, and people from both the theist and non-theistic worldviews have disagreements with each other and even among their own camps. While this issue may not be 100% as certain and set in stone as science or math, there are some basic principles that both sides can agree on that will ultimately make the world a better place than it was yesterday. How exactly we come to a conclusion is not nearly as important as finding common ground on how to treat people. This is the pressing issue at hand that need not be muddied with philosophical jargon. When trying to figure out how we should treat others, a kind of metaphorical plumb line can be used. When construction workers are trying to make sure the surface is flat, they have traditionally used levels. When measuring top to bottom, however, many people make the mistake of referring to this as level as well. But this is actually plumb. A plumb line is used to make this measurement and ensure accurate distances running horizontally. A weight is attached to a string, and that distance can be matched to other sides of a room or structure. Keeping this in mind, it serves as a perfect metaphor for a measuring device to indicate what our response to others should be. The Platinum Rule seeks to modify the Golden Rule's biggest potential Achilles heel. The Platinum Rule says to treat others the way they want to be treated, whereas the Golden Rule employs you to treat others the way you want to be treated. The problem arises in recognizing how you may want to be treated might vary drastically to others. This is the aforementioned Achilles heel. However, the Platinum Rule has its own blind spot as well, as many can operate in varying degrees of toxicity, self-harm, addiction, codependency, and so on. At the end of the day, either of these rules has potential problems when factoring that many people are mentally and emotionally compromised. This is something that needs to be approached with care and compassion as we try to evaluate how we should engage this world. But having a degree of objectivity and blindness can help move the conversation in the right direction. Blindness ultimately is the best and most foundational form of ethics to base our understanding of empathy. In the American penal system, Lady Justice is a symbol of blind justice and is adopted from ancient Rome. This depiction shows the ultimate source of true adjudication and recompense. impartiality. This is the first and foremost important building cornerstone as we begin to lay a foundation of a colorblind society which treats all peoples equally. Even if colorblindness is not theoretically possible, treating all races the same is completely reasonable. Building upon this bedrock is of vital importance, and even the smallest hint of unlevel ground can throw off the entire edifice. Cue the Plumbline. Empathy as a way of life. Dictionary.com gives the following definition of empathy: the psychological identification with or vicarious experience of the emotions, thoughts, or attitudes of another. Sympathy and empathy are often thought as being interchangeable, but they are not. However, they can be thought of as siblings, stemming from grandparents of care, respect, and understanding. While most people want to be treated well, sympathy can have somewhat of a negative connotation, as it implies a kind of feeling of superiority as one person cannot relate to the other. Empathy, however, can put an observer into the metaphorical shoes of another and create an environment of mutual trust and compassion. It may be too much of an emphatic claim to make, but empathy is absolutely and unequivocally impossible. True, unadulterated empathy is not plausible to achieve with any other human being. I have absolutely come to understand beyond any doubt that true, unfiltered empathy is positively, absolutely not within our grasp as mere mortal beings. But making this recognition moves us one step up the evolutionary ladder that will ironically make it more within reach. Knowing the limits and constraints we face helps us at least begin at the same starting point: frailty and finite understanding. Empathy should humble us all as we recognize that we will all have the same exact life cycle. At one point, we did not exist. We exist now, and eventually we will be extinguished. Well, we may have completely different starting points or journeys. The beginning stages of existence and non existence are exactly alike. Furthermore, we are going to stay human in this life. Our DNA dictates that we are not going to turn into a flea, water, horse, or plant. So our experiences as humans give us connections. We all bleed, pee, poop, breathe, eat, spit, sleep, burp, blush, and so on. Certain things are not going to change no matter which era we are born or which continent we are spawned. As an empathetic exercise, we can imagine the individual experiences of others who are going about their day. Without going into too much detail, we can imagine the bowel movements of others, their grooming routines, or the processing of their lunch that is taking place in their stomachs. We can visualize their lungs taking in the air that we are sharing together. Imagine them asleep in bed tonight or in their mother's arms as an infant. And if you are so inclined, even as a zygote, an egg, or sperm. The more we can recognize the exact humanity of others, the more difficult it becomes to treat others with contempt. Ultimately, we cannot know anyone completely. The only thing we can go off of is our limited interactions of their behavior and perhaps some research into their lives. But what chemicals are at work in their bodies? What neurons are misfiring? What information they are processing at the time of choices are ultimately going to be giant mysteries to us. We have no way of understanding the totality of how our family's histories have played into shaping us, let alone any other person. Knowing this just centers us dead in the middle of the planet Earth and hits us with the gravity of the cosmos. In another life, perhaps, we can experience everything others have, and our empathy meter can reach its max. But for now, let us recognize the limits and boundaries of us all that binds us together. Being origins. The very nature of the word being is interesting. To be. Being is both a verb and a noun. What better word is there to describe a human other than a being? Being many things simultaneously is what our existence is all about. We are at the same time sons, fathers, sisters, moms, cousins, siblings, friends, villains, and heroes. We experience several states at different times, such as being a student, an infant, happy, sad, a dishwasher, cook, unemployed, retired, alive, dead, and so on. So much transient exists in the reality of our beingness. Reality in our beingness is constantly fading and fluctuating like a flickering flame that will eventually fade into nothingness. This may seem too elementary to even mention, but it is a starting point that needs to be considered when we discuss empathy and how we put it just a little nearer to our grasp. Upon our first gasp of air, so much has already been determined with the cosmic dice roll. The timestamp to the thousandth decimal point marks our entrance. The GPS coordinates were sketched with remarkable accuracy, with even longer digits into the millions. Mines are 35.3826708 latitude and dash 118.970238 longitude. Kern Medical Center in Bakersfield, California. And further, what coordinates our parents ventured from to the hospital further digs this rabbit hole. We can extend this down a virtual endless regression that should give us pause to truly understand how much is completely out of our control or even understanding when we evaluate who and what we actually are. Whether or not we were born to wed or unwed parents could drastically can change circumstances, or even the order in which we were born. The age of our parents, their financial status, literally millions of factors go into shaping the very fabric of who we become, the past tense or completion of being. From the very foundation to the building blocks of ourselves, we must marvel at the complexity and sojourn they took to comprise us. Forged in the hearts and depths of stars, they were tossed about the universe to the point in which they now sit in us. When we really soak up the magnitude and majesty of this process, we can truly start to see the incredible miracle and impossible nature of the formation of the cells that are in front of us. But in this reality, we must note how incredibly different we actually are. From our origins to history to makeup, we have a vast discrepancy of symmetry. Understanding the seeding and spawning of us all should give us a small moment of reflection to think of all those who came before us who did not have the comforts or knowledge we now have. Forgiving the past, owning up to it, and moving forward is something that must be undertaken as a species if we're going to put in the necessary work to moving us to the next level of raised consciousness where empathy is a given. And words like sexism, racism, lookism, presentism, ageism, or any other isms are removed from our minds. To hate others for their race, sex, or origin makes as much sense as someone from the 1800s or 2400s despising our existence because we were born in the 20th century, or perhaps even on planet Earth, if we have colonized the planets by then. Similarly, it would be like assigning worth to people whether or not they had an even or odd amount of cells in their body at the time of birth, or if they were in prime numbers. This makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. The beautiful snowflakes. Being a snowflake has ironically become a pejorative over the last few years, as it was once seen as a compliment. The implication, of course, being people are fragile and easily capable of being triggered into melting. This is probably somewhat an accurate description for an entitled generation who has had to deal with very little, if any, struggle, and also have had to grow up with the misfortune of living in a society that panders to nearly every complaint. But ultimately, whether we like it or not, we are by no fault or input of our own unique, just like everyone else. The science behind what makes frozen water crystals special is complex, and it involves oxygen atoms, the bonding of electrons, and negative charges that provide a degree of virtual endless possibilities. But regardless of the geometry and chemistry that causes such a great variance, we can take a step back to marvel at the absolute beauty and majestic nature of this creation, which is here today and gone in a blink of an eye, just like us. No snowflake ever asked to be frozen and brought down from the sky and changed from vapor into solid matter, but it happened. Likewise, no one person ever asked to be born or even had one iota of input for who they are or what or from where they hail. Wrapping our minds around this concept, we can see it makes absolutely no sense to judge or hate anyone based on their nationality, race, sex appeal, age, or so on. While we abhor the thought of being judged ourselves for variables that are completely out of our control, we can frequently throw caution to the wind and wield that sword with reckless abandon. But as we stop and process the next nugget of truth, we take a small but giant step in moving up this ladder. This easy recognition may take only 30 seconds to fully grasp, but it will be the equivalent of moving us skyward on a SpaceX rocket. Repetition cycles. If it ever feels as though Hollywood has run out of ways to tell new stories, that's probably because it has. Looking back at the highest grossing films of all time, it would be clear to notice the vast majority of the list are either remakes, sequels, prequels, or spin offs. With juggernauts like The Fast and the Furious, Toy Story, Star Wars, Harry Potter, Pirates of the Caribbean, Twilight, Lord of the Rings, and anything made by Marvel or DC Comics dominating the landscape, there is little room for newcomers. If it ever seems like there is no arena for new source materials or ideas, it's because it's mostly true. Furthermore, the classics are far superior to our current productions. But that's another story altogether. According to many who study literature at an academic level, there are only seven basic plot types: overcoming the monster, rags to riches, the quest, voyage and return, rebirth, comedy, Not merely laughter, but overcoming unusual circumstances and tragedy. Yes, it's hard to believe, but it's true. Every movie or play ever written has been some telling of one of these plots or an amalgamation of several. Academics like Booker have chronicled this phenomena in such works as The Seven Basic Plots: Why We Tell Stories, which took over 30 years to research and complete. Although it may seem impossible, it completely makes sense and is understandable why many superhero movies seem to be exact carbon copies of each other. Bringing this home, art imitates life. Writers and producers gather inspiration from things around them, people they know who have fallen in love, overcoming impossible odds, or having fallen victim to circumstance. Personalizing this, each person has seen these many movies dozens, if not hundreds, or thousands of times in their own life or in the lives of those around them, including family, friends, and strangers. So even if it is in a different context with our with or with different characters, we are familiar with rises and falls, cliffhangers, tension, and sometimes unresolved plot lines in our lives. Comparing journeys to others puts a virtual endless supply of source material to compare and contrast. While we cannot relate on every point, we we can always affirm the struggle and sacrifice others have made as we examine our own highs and lows in this journey. Looking back at the great empires of the past, it is easy to marvel of the feats of those we now figure to be primitive. Rome, for example, paved the way for centuries of innovation and scientific exploration. In fact, many words relating to biology and science are rooted in Latin thanks to Rome. Not too far from Rome, we can look at the explorations of the people of Greece, who revolutionized democracy, medicine, meteorology, and philosophy, and who nearly conquered the known world. Yet both these countries received a rather long fall from grace in the last 100 years. Italy faced a handily defeat in World War II and became the first major Axis nation to bow out in 1943, a full 2 years before Germany and Japan succumbed. And Greece itself was brought to its feeble knees at the hands of suited bankers and EU auxiliary measures. Taking this thought into account, it is easy to see that we might not be as strong tomorrow as we were today. In fact, it's positively assured. One of the greatest errors and faulty lines of reasoning is assuming that the future will be like the past. Spoiler alert, it won't. Keeping this in mind, it completely stands to reason that those strong today might not be so strong tomorrow, and vice versa. Therefore, it makes sense to treat everyone with care and compassion, as situations can change, and it may be the case that we can find subordinates as our overlords. Even if such extreme changes might never happen, chances are we're going to be in positions later where we are not right now. Youth, beauty, and strength betrays us all. Be it from recession, sickness, age, or whatever, we're bound to need compassion and empathy levied in our direction in the near and immediate future. Proceeding forward, the most prudent course of action is to operate in a spirit of colorblindness that treats everyone with respect until they give us reason to do otherwise. While it may seem expedient to cut corners and lines, and sometimes operate in haste and prejudice. We are ultimately shooting ourselves in the foot in the grand picture, as we are contributing to a worse world for ourselves and our next of kin. The brute reality should ground us all and leave us with a sense of awe and urgency, as it backhand slaps our inner person and child. Thought experiment. You walk into a busy movie theater for only the briefest of seconds. You are ushered off into the back corner of the theater. Since you know your seat in advance, you decide to bring a pair of binoculars to enhance your view. Your binoculars are handmade and are crudely fashioned from non-plastic environmentally friendly drinking straws. As the movie commences, you are allowed to see the corner of the opening scene for a mere second. As you are escorted out of the theater, you encounter many people in the lobby who are talking about the movie and parts that they saw, and realize what you saw might be drastically different. And although you heard the movie, others lacked this sense. Although this sounds like an absurd scenario, the reality of the cosmos and our transient experience of this world are far worse than this thought experiment. Calculating the age of the Earth at roughly 4.5 billion years, a single second in a 24-hour period represents 55,000 years. 55,000 times 60 seconds times 60 minutes times 24 hours equals 4.7 billion years. On this scale, the dinosaurs are still alive at 11 p.m. At 11:58, hominins finally start to appear. Finally, at 11:59, 20 and 20.23 seconds, early primitive humans finally make their grand appearance, and it is not until the last 2 seconds do we see, maybe that's 200ths of a second, do we see what we would recognize as human civilization. Scaling up to the cosmos, the prospects are far more abysmal. In this 24-hour time period, a single second is equivalent to roughly 170,000 years, for a grand total of nearly 15 billion years. If this seems overwhelming, we're just getting started. Light travels at 186,000 miles per second. Even at this rate, it would take light 46 billion years to travel across the observable universe. It is important to note that this is merely what is observable, as there are limitations to what we can see in this universe, as information has been lost and can never be seen due to the particle horizon that is ever expanding. What might be on our knowable universe is anyone's guess, and this is not even accounting for alternate dimensions, multiverses that may or may not exist. To say we had a second to observe a movie theater would be generous beyond words, but this is the reality in which we face. There are still many mysteries in the quantum level and dealing with the origin of the universe that scientists are still trying to work out. Some of these may be forever past our limited scope, being in such a small corner of the cosmos. Although this may be a bit overwhelming, to put it in a slightly more scientific way, we do not know jack shit, individually or collectively. Even if we were somehow able to gather all the information of our history and planet and solar system, this is just a drop in a virtual endless sea of billions upon billions of galaxies. Indeed, what humanity or the next species in charge might know in 1,000 or 100,000 years from now might completely obliterate our current knowledge. Once great mysteries are unlocked, our current understanding will likely seem like child's play when we left behind, which we left behind in kindergarten. This is in no way meant to diminish our understanding of the world around us. In fact, there are enough mysteries inward. There are enough mysteries inward to, to occupy our minds all eternity. The task of self-exploration, discovery, and improvement are noble voyages in and of themselves. The only point is to drive in the fact that we do not have everything figured out, like everyone else. Knowing our limited knowledge, perspective, and experience is enough of a reason to cut a little slack and show a little grace to those who may not be up to our par. We may know a lot compared to those around us, but that's not saying much when we compare it to another 8 billion people who have all manner of knowledge and experience that will never grace the wrinkles of our brain. Take another second or 170,000 of them to soak in this fact. That's 2 days. Once we acknowledge this, a rung is pulled down and we proceed skyward. Tying the loose ends. Empathy is our best bet in determining how to deal with others, though it may fail at the end of the day. While it has absolutely no guarantee of ourselves being treated kindly, with respect, or equal measure, it builds the environment and stratosphere which makes this possible. Knowing that people repeat behavior and learn from example, mere statistics would indicate that governing our lives and society with these principles means that each individual will be more likely to inherit a world which they can be treated in the same regard as they treat others. The platinum plumb line takes measurements of ourselves and our kind and moves it about the planet. Objectively speaking, and with no prejudice, we can evaluate our own actions, thoughts, and intentions. While we are going to inevitably fail at times, it allows us to see the areas which need to be adjusted. Like a level that reads slightly off center, we can see where the lack is and how we need to adjust and improve. Having a broken level can throw off all calibrations, as can peeking through our proverbial blindfold as we distribute justice. The more objective we can evaluate people's behavior, including our own, the more objectively we can evaluate people's behavior, including our own, the better position we can be to address toxic behavior that include biases of all shapes and gradients. For better or for worse, we are given a fraction of reality to process. From a tainted vantage point, we are all trying to work out what is best for us on a daily basis. And many times, hindsight and maturity will make us cringe at past words and deeds. Even worse, we somehow condemn others for actions we have done ourselves, as hypocrisy is as common among humanity as blood, bone, and carbon. This blind spot plagues us all, but we can seek to temper its effect as our condemnation and judgment moves us back down the ladder of enlightenment, back to the origins of our primate cousins we descend. Last thoughts. And finally, there is one last kicker that will really throw us for a loop. We can only truly empathize with ourselves. For all the knowledge, for all the enlightenment we may ascribe to, a clone and a multiverse is the only person who would truly understand our faults, bias, mistakes, motivation, that presently comprises us. Should we meet such a character at the edge of the universe, where it is indistinguishable whose universe starts and whose end, we shall meet for a long embrace of love, compassion, and endless empathy. Without judgment, we can completely and wholly understand this character. And if by some stroke of chance this character was once seated in the shoes of another, we could continue that non judgment and understand this alternate version of ourselves. Perhaps this scenario will only play out in reruns of a Twilight Zone in some alternate world, or under the hallucination of an ayahuasca trip. But the point remains so clearly. Striving to understand others' journeys will collectively move us up this enlightenment ladder. When we realize that others use the same me and I to describe themselves as the same manner we do, we know that we are truly in this game together. From rich to poor, old to young, black to white, we are all being and experiencing this world through the same lens of a first person experience. No story is greater or lesser. And in this perpetual story that has raged throughout time. This recognition, this affirmation of our fellow kind can truly turn an enemy into a friend or any stranger into a brother. This all starts with displacing ourselves from the driver's seat and seeing through the lens of another. After being sat down by the power and the magnitude of the universe, we can see that with a slight shift of the cosmic dice, our existence might be the same exact as those we might despise in this lifetime. With us being born in different millennia or with different parents, we might have had an experience that doesn't remotely resemble which we now experience. It is only with these recognition that we can humanize the others and seek their elevation, even if it means lowering ourselves in the process. These are the acts that will transform this planet from a madness and chaos into an achievable utopia. And in this quest, empathy will be our greatest ally in that journey.